Hi everyone, good day. I have the pleasure of sitting here with Dr. Ian Stewart. He's an associate professor of humanities at the University of King's College in Halifax. And my name is Noushin Nabavi, and I'm a Canadian Science Policy Fellow at the BC Ministry of Health and a volunteer with the CSPC Program Committee. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that even though we are joining virtually, we are on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen, Esquimalt First Nations. That's Victoria, and Ian is connecting to us from the Mi'kmaq territory. So just want to acknowledge their past and present contributions to the land. So welcome, Ian. I will start by first asking you about your field of science and technology and the courses that you teach at the University of King's College in Halifax. So if you can tell us more about that.
Sure. So my field is actually the history of science and technology, which is really a hybrid field of humanities that combines methodologies from history, from philosophy, from social sciences, to study the course of humanity's attempts to understand the natural world and the human as part of that world over time, and our attempts to harness that knowledge through technology to improve the human condition. So as a historian and as a philosopher of science, I find myself constantly thinking about and teaching students to think about questions over time that are quite close to ones that the science policy folks also wrestle with, like what is science, what is it for, when is it being best done to serve human goals of flourishing, and what are the limits of technology, how do complex problems get solved in using complex knowledge systems. So it's usually an academic field that's reserved for graduate schools. But here at the University of King's College in Halifax, we're very fortunate to have one of the few in Canada honors level bachelor degree programs in the discipline, which you can do as a BA or as a BSc, which is done always in partnership with the university next door to us, Atlantic Canada's largest university, Dalhousie University. So our degrees are joint degrees. As a professor in the humanities here at King's, I'm also fortunate to be part of one of Canada's oldest integrative first-year programs in the Great Books tradition. It's a tradition of education that is known and loved south of the border in liberal arts colleges, the Great Books programs. And at King's, it's one of the oldest in Canada. Like Arts One in UBC, it was founded in the early 1970s. And it gives students a kind of integrative first-year exposure to the great works of literature and philosophy from the ancient world to the present. So I teach in that program, but I teach a number of courses in the history of science field, from ancient medicine to medieval science and politics. Right now, I'm teaching a new course for me called Engineering the Planet, the Anthropocene from Prehistory to Today's Global Crisis, which is a great, and almost all my students are science students. So it's with a smattering of historians. So it's great fun.
Oh, that's fascinating. I wish I was young enough to attend those courses or be on that side of the...
Me too.
But thank you. So can you tell us more about the impact assessment and so what it is, and what's your interest in it as a historian and philosopher of science?
So impact assessment is a kind of planning process that is usually associated with the projects, large projects, pipelines, mines, hydroelectric projects, highways, various forms of human industry that have the potential of impacting the environment. They used to be called environmental impact assessments. And they're now called, in Canada, at least since 2019, they're called impact assessments. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And their job really is as planning tools to try to assess and predict possible negative impacts of projects and to think about ways in which they could be mitigated or prevented or lessened. And it's really a kind of field of applied science that is very closely connected to processes of, you would say, political processes, small p political processes of deliberation collectively, which often involves a high degree of consultation of communities who are potentially affected by a project, either positive or negative ways. And at the federal level, the agency that oversees this is the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. It was renamed at the end of 2019. It used to be called the Canada Environmental Assessment Agency. And there are, at the provincial level, there are environmental impact or impact assessment bodies that do work. And increasingly in Canada, Indigenous peoples are taking charge of this field of management for their own nations as well. I got interested in this field as a science historian, really also as a person interested in science policy, because it's one of these fields of inquiry into the natural world, and that requires increasingly a kind of consideration of the ways in which human communities are inseparable from their natural environments. Mm-hmm. So I've become very interested in the field of socio-ecological systems, and partly by way of being a philosopher of science, I'm interested in how different kinds of knowledge systems come into play and are integrated or clash in these complex processes of deliberation that involve necessarily us thinking about humans and their natural environments and how they are inseparable. So I am lucky enough to be heading up a SSHRC-funded national project, which is just getting going now, which is essentially trying to mobilize Canada's social science and humanities scholars who either are already working in the field of impact assessment, or who are and don't know it because of their specific fields. They may be doing work that's extremely relevant, from political scientists to anthropologists to sociologists to philosophers and historians of science like me. And so along with my colleague at the University of Alberta, Dr. Deborah Davidson, who's an environmental sociologist, we're spearheading a national project funded by SSHRC and also with deep support from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. And partly it will involve case studies and into methodologies, but also a big part of our thing is to develop a network. It's called MEDIA, the Network of Expertise and Dialogue on Impact Assessment, which is going to try to bring together scholars at universities across the country. So it's a pan-Canadian project, but also to start to allow, for example, the internet and other IT-enabled platforms to establish a community of dialogue around issues and perhaps a resource base, and also to bring folks from communities and from the private sector, and perhaps also to draw in the various levels of provincial and territorial governments into these conversations. So it's a kind of an ambitious project, 3-year project. COVID has thrown a big monkey wrench into our plans. But that it just means that monkey wrench isn't really the right word. I should say it's caused us to rethink how we create community online. And that's, of course, going to be relevant to how we do this conference, because the CSPC conference will be online for the first time. So that'll be interesting.
Yes, great point. Yeah, that actually just brings me back to the next question. And so, CSPC is very diverse, as you've been in the conference before, brings in decision makers, scientists, policymakers, and but in your own words, why would you think this topic is important to CSPC?
Yes, well, I was obviously, our panel was happy that CSPC thought it was a relevant topic since we were accepted. Well, in my view, as I've perhaps already intimated, I think that the field of science policy is, of course, a very broad one, as you said, and it's one that takes in just such a 360-degree perspective on things. And so, from my point of view, impact assessment is exactly one of those things that at the heart of a cluster of questions that are important for the science policy community, such as how do the different kinds of sciences interact with one another, the human sciences, the social sciences, and the natural sciences. In particular, the panel that we've developed for this conference has explicitly it fits within the rubric of how do the social and human sciences contribute to the science policy community in questions. And in particular, the panel that we put together is one that is explicitly asking how does the field of impact assessment support Canada's sustainable development goals, and what's the role in particular of this relatively newer emphasis within at least the federal impact assessment legislation upon thinking about how the human and the social sciences are part of the complex deliberation about what is an impact, who should assess what an impact is, and how do we do a better job of thinking, for example, about the long-term story, about both the positive and the negative effects of our natural resource industries, for example, upon not just our economies, but also upon the health of our communities, both locally and within provinces and federally.
Mm-hmm. Well, so thank you for that. So I guess you kind of alluded to that, who is going to be on the panel for the conference, but what can we expect, I guess, from your panel?
Well, I'm so honored to be joined by the folks on this panel. So it will involve just going from west to east, Steve DeRoy, who works for Firelight, which is a private sector firm that specializes in impact assessment, and particularly working with First Nations. And Steve is a leader in the field, particularly in Canada within a field of IT, essentially, which is using mapping technologies, in particular with working with Indigenous communities. And we have Professor Gwendolyn Blue from the University of Calgary, who's a social geographer. We have a biologist in the person of Dr. Cheryl Chetkiewicz, who works in the NGO world with the Canada Wildlife Service, and she's particularly interested in how the natural sciences and the social sciences need to be integrated better at the level of impact assessment. She's an impact assessment practitioner, as is Steve DeRoy. Gwen and I are more egg-heady academics who've had way less experience actually on the ground working in impact assessment. But both Gwen and I think a lot about how, in particular, impact assessment involves very complex and nuanced questions around how people's knowledge gets integrated into these collective processes of deliberation. Of course, at the end, there's a decision that's made at the ministerial level, at the federal level in Canada, but always with a great deal of care taken to think about the kind of knowledge gathering that happens along the way. So all four of us are going to be thinking from our own different perspectives about that. Steve from the Indigenous knowledge perspective, Gwen from a social from the non-Indigenous communities perspective, their contributions, Cheryl from the point of view of how folks are involved in both natural and community knowledge. And I'll be speaking in general about impact assessment and a little bit about the project that I just mentioned. And we're very pleased to have as our moderator, Dr. Miriam Podolsky, who is the Director of Science Policy at the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada.
Oh, that's very exciting. Yeah, we definitely look forward to the discussions and hearing from the panelists. So yeah, I guess that brings me to the conference, and which is happening November 16th to 20th. So this year it's going to be going entirely virtual, and this will be a new experience for many of us and an opportunity to reach a wider audience. So as, I guess, a longtime partner of the CSPC, what are you most looking forward to with the new platform that's going online, and reaching a wider audience?
Mm. A few months ago, I would have said, I'm terrified of the idea of giving a talk online because I had never done that. Now I've been lecturing all term online, so I'm a bit more used to working with cameras and speaking to PowerPoints. What I'm looking forward to is the fact that through that CSPC has provided for us ample opportunities for breakout sessions. So I'm looking forward to the fact that at the each of us is only going to speak about 10 minutes, and then we will have a breakout room. And that will be for me a new, not quite a new experience, but because we've all been doing Zoom meetings for, it seems like for the rest all our lives now, doesn't it? But I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of mini conversations flourish out of that breakout session. Well, there'll be 4 breakout sessions. Each one of us will kind of lead one, depending on. I suppose if no one joins my room, I'll just join another one or something like that. But then we'll come back and see whether there's any learning that happens as a result of the various discussions. So we'll have some guiding questions for each one of those, but then we're going to bring it back together. And I'm really looking forward to seeing both who shows up to our panel, in the sense that, for the first time, this is going to be online. So there could be folks taking part in the panel that are from abroad. I've been to several CSPC conferences, and obviously there's a heavy kind of Ontario contingent, and that's going to be very different this year. So I'm hoping that our panel in particular will be visited by people who are perhaps new to CSPC conferences, who are not necessarily in the academic world, who might be people who have got deep experience on the ground, who might be thinking about what does this new Federal Impact Assessment Act, which came into force only at the end of August of 2019, what does it mean for us? And I'm also hoping that people who are not necessarily scholars in the impact assessment field will join us and see what this is about. So I think I'm really excited by the new platform it's a terrible thing that the world is in the grip of a pandemic. At the same time, there is a kind of opportunity, which is, I think we're all seeing, has been opened up for us, that physical meetings at conferences somehow didn't manifest for us so obviously, which is that we can create virtual communities so much more easily.
That's fantastic. Yeah, being on the program committee, I can tell you that there are participants from Japan and Europe, so definitely reaching a wider audience. So that's great. We definitely look forward to your panel, Ian, and hearing the panelists talk about impact assessment and what.
And I want to give a big shout out to CSPC. I think you guys have done an amazing job turning things around and making it happen like this. And I know it's been the result of a lot of people doing volunteer work as well. So these are always the unsung heroes. So big kudos to all of those of you who are doing things on a volunteer basis.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Yes. There's many of us and great team to work with. So I definitely pitch for that anytime. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Ian, for sitting with us, and we look forward to your panel. Cheers.
Thank you.